Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. And today, as you just saw right there, everyday macro, everyday things. Mahesh is probably going to recreate that picture. It's going to be a me and a teardrop. We'll switch it up a little bit. Mahesh Thapa, Sony ambassador, joining us. Mahesh, always good to have you on, man. What's going on?
Derek, pleasure. It's the holiday season, and here that means it's winter, and it's a lot of dreary days, a lot of rainy days, so a lot of just staying at home. And I wanted to time this talk, just for this time because I'm sure there are many people out there who are sort of feeling the winter blues, and I'm here
Oh,
to tell
yeah.
you that it doesn't have to be that bad. As long as you have a macro lens, a camera at home, there's many things you can photograph in and around your home and your backyard. And I feel like macro photography in particular really lends itself to that type of local environment. So today I'm going to talk about some everyday macro with some specific attention to, like, for example, that picture you saw initially as the screen splash, about how to create something like that. It's super easy. And once you see it, you're like, "Ah, why didn't I think of that," kind of thing. Okay. So let's,
Awesome.
yeah,
Let's do it.
that's
Well,
the time
well,
for
if I
today. Let's do it.
disappear, I'm over there taking pictures of Christmas tree ornaments. All right. I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A, Mahesh.
All right, brother. So today is everyday macro photography. And I don't want me to be sort of facetious or flippant about that, but really is something that you can do every day around your home. And I'm not talking about, you get a macro lens and you get a really close-up picture of somebody's eye, or you find a coin, you take a picture of that. We can be a little bit more creative, get our juices going, if you will. And it doesn't have to be just around the house. You could have this stuff with you as you're just, walking the beach on a wintry day, stormy scene, morning. You can apply it to other aspects of your activity, your daily activities, but something that's quick, fun, easy, and I think that you love to do. So let's get started. Uh, I gave a link to Danny. I think he'll put this on the chat, but I have a little article that I published a couple of years ago, and it's called "What's in My Bag: A Super Simple Kit for Macro Photography." Now, you can substitute a lot of this equipment for what I talk about, but I'm gonna talk mainly about, as far as the camera and lenses, it's going to be Sony centric. Sony is sponsoring this, but there are equivalent equipment for other manufacturers, that you can apply. But the accessories, I think, are really cool. That's what's really going to drive the point home, that you could think about getting, particularly for tricky situations where you need things in certain positions all the time and you don't have 5 different assistants or multiple hands. So these are little quick tips and tricks to help you out. Let's talk about the two cameras that I use all the time for my macro photography. It all depends on what I'm shooting, how much room I need, basically between the subject and myself. The first one, and I'm only going to talk about the features that are relevant to my type of macro photography. Obviously, these cameras have tons of bells and whistles, but the one I use currently is the Sony A7R5. It's got a high megapixel count, and that actually matters a little bit because oftentimes you want to get bigger than life-size macro. So if your macro lens is 1 by 1 and you get a full frame image, you can crop down to even smaller amount and still have a lot of megapixels left over to do a 1:2 macro or 1:1 to 1.5 macro. So you can compensate for the fact that you don't have maybe the true macro lens, or you need to get even closer, even bigger blow up by getting a camera that has a little bit more megapixels. In addition, particularly for static subjects, and this is one of the best features I think the A7R5 has, is this a pixel shift multi-shooting mode where it combines between 4 and 16 shots, depending on how you want to do it, to come up with a whopping 241 megapixel image. Now you have an amazing amount of croppability, if you will, and detail. And because it's doing this by pixel shifting, you have better color profile, less noise, less moire artifacts. It's really great. So if you have a subject that's not moving, and a lot of macro shots, that it sort of fits that bill, you'll be sort of able to utilize this multi-shift. And there are other manufacturers and cameras out there that have this multi-shoot or multi-pixel binning, or whatever you called it, to come up with a higher megapixel image. So I'd give you advice to utilize that as much as you can, particularly if your subject is stable. And finally, It has this camera and other cameras where it has focus bracketing. So if you want that really high depth of field, which is difficult to do on a single shot with a macro lens, just because you're so close to the subject matter, you could utilize focus bracketing. And this has one of the better implementations, I think, of focus bracketing. So that's sort of my main go-to full frame sensor. And I also use the A6700 mainly because of the 1.5 crop, and it still also has the focus bracketing. Sometimes I'm maybe photographing a bug, or maybe there's a spider web in the corner of the house because we forgot to clean that particular area last week, and there's a nice little spider. But if you get too close, it sort of spooks them. So this lets me stand a little further away with my same macro lens that I use and still get a very good macro shot. And oftentimes, because the system isn't very bulky, I can handhold it. The image stabilization is really, really good on something like this. So whether you want to go the crop way or you want to go the full frame way, I think there's something available in each camp. The main lens that I use is this one here. I think I'm going to put this up. This is the Sony 90mm f2.8G macro lens. Now, there's several reasons I really like this as a dedicated macro. First of all, it's a dedicated macro lens, so it has 1-to-1 magnification, autofocus, great image stabilization. So if you happen to have a camera that doesn't have in-body image stabilization, which is getting rarer now, but there are cameras out there with that. This has built-in optical image stabilization that you can utilize. I love the fact that its focusing ring, the distance is marked, and you could go from autofocus to manual focus by simply sliding the ring back and forth. I can't tell you how nice that is when I'm looking through the viewfinder, got the position exactly where I want it, and I don't want to be in autofocus anymore. I just slide the ring back, and I'm manual focus. I don't have to worry about any misregistration when I'm doing any kind of a bracketing shot or combining multiple exposures. That's really, really good for that. It also has, now, sometimes some older image stabilization systems and cameras, when you're on a tripod, it doesn't play nice. So sometimes when you're on a tripod, you actually have to turn the image stabilization off. Some of the newer cameras, it recognizes when you're on a tripod, but it actually has the option just on the barrel to turn image stabilization on or off, which is, I find, very, very frequently I use some of the older cameras, some of the more manual focus cameras, and it has a little customizable button. You can press that. Typically, I use this for quickly go from autofocus to manual focus without actually having to use the ring. If I'm hand holding something, that's really convenient for that. So this is my go-to lens. It's 90mm, so you still have quite a bit of distance between you and your subject. And if you want even more distance, you can put this on a 1.5 crop body, and you could really stand back, because now it becomes a 135mm macro lens. So that's my go-to lens. One thing I really want to point out, which is a little different than some other macro lenses, is the aperture blade. The aperture blade on this particular lens is circular. So I'm sure that, so when the blades line up, it creates a nice circle image. So this really comes into play when you have autofocus areas. What most lenses have, this sort of conventional flat plates that create the aperture as it comes down, but it doesn't have a nice round appearance. So the bokeh, particularly if you have pinpoint lights or bright lights, or even other autofocus areas that are a little bit brighter than some of the surroundings, it doesn't render it as nicely as this very round autofocus areas because of these circular aperture blades. So people don't really think about that, and you can already tell when you're looking at a macro image and you look at the autofocus areas, which is using a flat blade versus circular blade. And I really prefer the look of these circular blades. And one other thing that people don't realize, that, well, polarizer, do you really need a polarizer? I thought that was for landscape photography, when you want to, get the sky looking really blue, or get rid of some glare. But this is also important in macro photography, particularly if you're using some external lights. You're always going to have glare on surfaces that you're lighting up, or even if you don't think there's glare, when you put a polarizer on and you engage it, you realize how much glare there really is. And a polarizer really helps to minimize that and bring out the richness and the colors of your subjects. So consider using a polarizer, even though you're just doing macro photography. A lot of people sort of don't think about using a polarizer. They go, oh, it's stopping light. I don't want to have low light, but you're on a tripod most of the time, so it really doesn't matter if you have to increase the time that you have the shutter open, because you lose a little bit of light from the polarizer. The benefit you get from the polarizer far outweighs the downsides, if you will, of losing a little bit of light. Okay, so here's a piece of equipment that I use all the time. It's called a platypod, and just the base is the platypod, but they also sell these little extensions, and they're called gooseneck. I think B&H sells these. There are different versions of the platypod. I think they have extreme version now. That's great for outdoor stuff. But when I got this many years ago, they had this version called the Ultra. I don't know if that's still available or not, but I've had this forever. And I like this sometimes when the surface is a little more challenging to use a tripod, or if I want to get really, really low to the ground. So I sort of use these, and you can put the camera directly on top of the plate. There's a little screw mount over here. So it's great. It's great to use as goosenecks to hold little lume cubes or any other light source that you may want to sort of direct on your macro subject. So this is one of the equipment that you may not have heard of, but once you use it, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I've lived all my life without it. So this is what I really like. And I also use this in conjunction with this particular tripod. This is the Pixie Evo Mini tripod. There are two versions. There's this version and a slightly less expensive version, which is the Mini, the first one they came out with. I don't like that one as much because of one simple reason. I actually have it here. It has a built-in ball head that actually will allow your let me see if I can figure this out. It'll allow your camera to go 90%. There's a little notch here built in, so such a little thing, but it makes a huge difference, because sometimes I want to do macro photography in landscape mode, and sometimes I want to do it in portrait mode. And having that notch right here in the built-in tripod head makes a huge difference. I also like the fact that the legs are somewhat expandable. So it has several places where you can put these legs locking in. So you're not sort of stuck to this one size position. You have the ability to change the size of your tripod leg a little bit at a time. And because it goes out so wide, if you look at this, it has a pretty wide footprint. I'm going to bring it out here. It's super stable. So, and it's amazingly lightweight. It only weighs about, I think, less than 10 ounces. So, and it holds up to 5.5, 6 pounds of weight. So this, in combination with the platypod, I use a lot. And here's another thing, and you may not have heard this, which I also find very, very helpful. In fact, jewelers use this tool quite a bit to hold on to a little piece of equipment so they can work on it easily. It's called Helping Hands, and it comes with these little alligator clips on the side. And I use this a lot for my macro photography involving flowers, or if I need to hold a piece of paper in the background, or a photo in the background in a particular position. It lets me allow to make minute movements without too much fuss. Again, these are little assistants, if you will, that help you hold things in position. I use this all the time. One of my most used equipments for everyday home macro photography. Finally, we talked about holding lights up, and my light of choice, just because it's so bright, it's so tiny, it has magnetic attachments if you have sort of metal surfaces. It has a tripod mount, and it's a little lume cubes that you see over here. In addition to those lume cubes, the tripod is also great. So I have a platypod, I've got that Manfrotto Pixie tripod, and this is typically where I hold my light on, because this is the tripod right here, by the way. It's made by Sirui is the company. It's 3T 35K. They have different colors. I really like the red because the night pops nice. Again, it's got this beautiful wide base, as you can see over here, and it sort of and it goes like this, and you sort of click it into place, and it locks, and this thing isn't moving. It actually even has a little bit of center column, so if you need to raise the light, and it's the perfect weight size to be on a table stand or inside of a little light box, if you will, because that's the next thing I'm going to talk about, is this what's called a studio in a box. If you want to get great even lighting, this is a great way of doing it. You could even use this in conjunction with the lume cubes to get some directional light, yet have a little built-in fill, because the directional light bounces off of these walls and fills in the shadows just a little bit. It creates this great effect. So the one I have is the 28 by 28 inch versions, but depending on your need, they're different sizes. You can actually close all these areas off and look down through this little opening over here. We can put your lens right through this and get this cool perspective of looking down on something. So that's also great. Something that you may not think about is a little syringe filled with water, or a little spray bottle filled with water. If you want to spray your subjects, like maybe a flower or maybe a CD, remember those things, little CDs? You can spray it with water, create this beautiful colored effect, have this misty dewdrop type of effect with the spray bottle. But what I like to use sometimes is just a little one drop of water here, one drop of water over there. You can actually shoot through the water to create some pretty cool effects. In fact, that's what I did for that opening picture, which I'll show you how to do in the next couple of slides. I know people are like, how'd you take that picture? I'll show you how I did that. But think about getting a little syringe. It comes in a medication bottle. You can get it at a drugstore, whatever. And I use this all the time. So this is sort of putting it all together, right? So I've got my camera is my macro lens, my little alligator clips on these helping hands, my platypod holding the lights, or my tripod holding the lights inside of this sort of studio box to go. So this is basically, what I create, or what I used to create some of the pictures I'm talking about. And that's indoors at home. So here is how I made this. So this is a very similar picture to the picture you saw in the opening image. So what I did was, on the alligator clips, on one clip I have a flower with its stem and a leaf sort of hanging out. On the other alligator clip, I've got my flower here with the dewdrop on this dewdrop, or this drop of water that I put on there carefully with the syringe, is this drop of water over here. So this big flower over here, the background defocused flower, and the green is actually the green leaf over here, and this flower. So this is positioned so that it's directly in front of this flower and this green leaf. And I'm using the macro lens, and I have quite a bit of distance, as you can see. I'm using the macro lens to focus through that drop of water on to the flower in the background. So that part becomes nice and sharp. The petal that the flower is on looks nice and sharp, but the background is this beautiful bouquet. And again, see how the round bouquet creates these beautiful soft edges, as opposed to the harsh edges you can sometimes get with flat aperture rings, if you will. So this is exactly the same way that I created this image. Okay, so what have I done here? If you can imagine, my lens is out here. This is another flower. I put a drop of water on the flower, and in the background, you can actually tell in the background, the out of focus background, this is a picture of my wife and me. So this is my wife over here, and that's probably me. That blob is me. And this is a picture inside a frame. You can actually see a little bit of that blue frame around here. You can see the blue frame around here. And this is some stuff that happened to be in my room that I wasn't very careful about. But this is just a little bit of something that I probably could have taken out. But you get the concept that, so I'm focusing on the droplet of water, and the droplet of water itself is creating this kind of fisheye appearance, gives a very wide angle appearance of whatever is behind it. But if you focus just on that, everything else sort of becomes nice and soft and diffuse background, and it creates this really cool effect. As you can imagine, you can do that with any subject you want, and you could you could zoom in as much as you want. So with this, I wanted to show a little bit of context of a flower, of the dewdrop, or the water drop, and the picture. But you could crop all the way down to here and just have this one little area create this sort of this abstract. How did you create that type of appearance? So it's really easy to do. You don't need everything that I talked about as far as the little paraphernalia but having that alligator clip really helped, because I could position this background picture exactly what I wanted on the one alligator clip, and I could position this flower exactly the place I wanted to as I dropped a bit of water on the petal. So right, you don't need all this, but it makes your life a heck of a lot easier. There are other things that you guys can use around the house, right? And my son has Legos all over the floor. I mean, my God, I can't take 3 steps before stepping on a Lego and puncturing my skin or something like that. But so I said, well, why don't I use this to my advantage? So the picture on your left, what I did was I took one of the little Stormtrooper Legos from the outside, and these are not boulders, right? These are just tiny little pebbles that I got. And there's a little bit of dirt from outside. I put it on the table, arranged the rocks, made it look like he was in a tunnel. And this is just, if you look carefully, this is just a match. So I lit the match up, and just the match light itself served as a source of light, this angled light. So there's no other light here except that little bit of glow from the lit match, and it creates this really cool effect, like he's inside of a tunnel or something. And here's one where we have Luke and Darth Vader fighting. And I don't know if you noticed, the astute watcher will notice that this is on a typewriter, an old-fashioned typewriter. And Luke is standing on S for son, and Darth Vader is standing on, what is that? F for father. Oh, didn't expect that, did you? Son and father dueling it out on top of a typewriter. So what I've also done is I've bought these little toy cars. They're tiny. They're like I don't know, maybe something like the size of a little SanDisk thing, or maybe even smaller, maybe even half the size of that. And depending on how you arrange things, you can make it look like it's a huge a huge car. And basically this was a bridge, a walking bridge that I was visiting, and I took one of the small cars, put it here, and I used the focus bracketing technique. So I focused a shot here, a shot here. So I focused like 200 shots between here and here to create that depth, and still have this tiny car look like a big car, and still have the depth of it being in its environment, so you can see exactly what you have in the distance. So it's not completely out of focus. In fact, it has a lot of depth, if you will. And because the car is in the foreground and you're using a macro lens, it becomes quite big. And the fact that you can see everything shot from here all the way to here, you have to use focus bracketing. You cannot create the shot like this with the macro lens without doing focus bracketing. So you can even see some of the textures of the snow on the ground. So it's really cool. It takes a little bit of time, but that's half the fun, is thinking about, oh, I'd love to create a shot like this. How do I go about it? So basically a tiny car in a nice environment that has these leading lines, great depth, and focus bracketing. So it gives you something like this. Here's another example where I used focus bracketing, but I didn't focus to the entire scene, right? I wanted to give that out of focus appearance a little bit still to the city. So this is in Seattle. You can kind of make out the Space Needle, the other buildings there. And look at these out of focus bokeh balls I was telling you about. Because of the 90mm aperture, they're nice and round. Look at how beautiful that is, as opposed to being polygonal in shape. And the focus bracketing here, I just went from this part of the car to that part of the car. So maybe just 20 images or so, and I left the out of focus part the way it is, because I really wanted the attention on this car. And the light is actually one of those little Lume Cube lights I have over here on the side, just barely lighting it up, not its full strength, on the side, giving us a nice angled lighting. And this was sort of a reflective surface that was in the area, and you can see some of the building lights here being reflected. So I thought that was a kind of cool effect. Again, at this point, all I had was a little platypod on one side with a little loom cube on top, my little toy car that I took with me in my pocket, and then just set it up on a surface, and took focus bracketed images and went home and processed it. So really not that much work if you think about it. Here's another one. So I mean, this car, believe it or not, is probably the size, maybe just a little bigger than an SD card, right? Again, it looks like it's a pretty big size car, a real Volkswagen Bug that's been stranded in the middle of nowhere on the Rocky Island, or they have 4x4 tires and they've gone on this. Again, this is a area of the beach where the pebbles or the stones are quite small. They're not huge. They're like maybe this big or so, but because of what the macro lens can do, it creates this great boulder-like appearance to these things. And again, the trick here, I could have made this shot where I focused everywhere from the front of the car all the way to the back of the scene, so everything is focused. But I wanted a little bit of mystery on the background, so I focused mainly from here to probably about here, and it's slightly defocused here and more defocused in the very, very background. Almost gives it like a portrait type of appearance, and but you still have an idea of what you're looking at, where you are. You have the environment. So these little toy cars, I think, make great subjects for macro photography. One more. Here, I have actually, this car is also about the same size as this SD card, right? And here I've extensively used maximum amount of depth of field so that everything, the tiny little rock surface from here all the way to the background mountains, these are the Cascades in the back, are in complete focus. And it just happened to be that I got some great light that morning. This is a sunrise in Seattle, in an area called Matthews Beach. And look at how beautiful that. You can see some of the light reflecting on the windshield over here. So yeah, so those are just some ideas for you guys to try out. Of course, you can use anything. It doesn't have to be cars. It can be little minifigures of people. You can use, fruits or other things as background material or subjects themselves. Really, there's no limit to the creativity that you can accomplish if you just think about it a little bit. All right, with that, I know you guys must have a few questions for me about any other suggestions or comments or recommendations.
Yeah, let's open it up for Q&A. I have a question to start.
Yeah.
Manual focus, what's the best way to manually focus? I just started actually using some legacy glass on my camera, and focus peaking is focus peaking. It looks great, and it's like it's so confident, it's confidence inspiring, and then you're like, well, everything's out of focus. What's the best way to manually focus with accuracy?
Right. So I thought focus peaking was the best thing since sliced bread. Well, the concept when I first heard about it,
Yeah.
And then I actually used it. Like, no matter what camera I've used, the problem with focus bracketing is it relies on contrast based focusing. So what it looks at high contrast edges in a certain plane. Well, I can tell you from experience that you can have something light up that's high in contrast between itself and the background or adjacent structure and not really be in focus. All you're outlining is these areas that are different in contrast, not necessarily difference in focus. So because I'll go, and whether you use a different color or different magnitude, like you can have low setting and high setting, it never quite gets it right. So in fact, I turn all of that off because I find it super distracting and in fact misleading many of the times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's misleading. And then what I do is I just zoom up as much as I can to the area that I want to be complete focus, and I turn every other extraneous information off. The grid lines are off, all the little text is off. It's just a nice, clear blank screen. And this is where having a high resolution optical viewfinder or an LCD happens. People say, oh, I don't need such a high res. for macro photography and you're trying to get that precise focusing, that's where, like for example, Sony has a 9 million dot optical viewfinder, which is amazing. You know, I think Fuji's the only other camera that has that in their medium format. But anyway, so that really helps. And then I bracket. Even then, I'm not completely sure. I focus bracket a little bit. So I said, okay, this is where I want to focus, but let me take 5 shots. But let the camera, and I let the camera take a few shots before the point of focus and a few shots after the point of focus. Because even with that, even when I think I've got it just right, the best shot will be maybe the 1 or 2 just behind it, or 1 or 2 just. So if you really need that sharpest focus at the one particular point, even with manual focusing, you should do a little bit of focus bracketing, I think. Another sort of similar issue is, well, if I want to focus bracket and I don't have a camera that has focus bracketing built in, what's the best way to take an image like that? You know, we can manually take these images at certain spots along the point that you want to focus. Get a rail, that a railing that has demarcations in millimeters or sub-millimeters, and so you choose a point of focus, and then you don't even have to look at the image. You just turn the little dial and move the railing certain distance towards it or away from the thing, and you take pictures every so often. You're guaranteed to take it at certain intervals instead of trying to rely on your own eyes to detect, oh, I think this is just enough, use a railing system.
Math. It's never wrong.
Yes, never wrong.
It's more reliable. Sean is asking if we'll post a link to your gear bag blog. I think we'll get that dropped if Danny hasn't already. We have a link to that, right? To your gear bag blog.
And yeah, let me just I think maybe also in the chat, I'll try to here's I think I had it in my clipboard, so I just put it in.
Okay, perfect. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I think we had it in there. All right. Yeah, we'll get that dropped in there. And make sure I go in here.
Yeah, it can be super fun. You know, I was just talking to my son the other day, and he's getting into doing some macro photography. So it ends up being my son who doesn't really like photography so much, but he really likes his Legos. So being able to sort of combine the photography, so he's getting into that a little bit. You know, he's, oh, that's so cool, Dad. And you could do actually claymation too with the Legos and macro photography, where you have it move every little bit here and there. You get this beautiful background that's blurred, and you get the little claymation action figures. That goes really hand in hand.
Do you ever play with tilt shift, or are you able to?
Oh yes.
Are you able to do like a tilt shift hack with macro? I've never thought about doing it, but
well, so it all depends on the minimum focusing distance and what you are willing to accept as macro. So, for example, these Lego pieces, they're not that small, so you could make it into a macro. What's great about the tilt shift lens is you change the plane of focus from something flat to something like angled. So for example, let's say in landscape photography, right? If you take a picture of your foreground flowers at whatever aperture, your background mountains are going to be out of focus unless you have a really large depth of field like f22 or f16. Even then, it's not great. But by the time you get to the aperture, everything is blurry because of diffraction. But what the tilt shift allows you to do is it changes the plane of focus such that the foreground plane is on the flower, and the background plane on a tilt is the background part is on the mountains. So the mountain is in focus and your flower is in focus, but what isn't in focus? There's no free lunch. The midground is not in focus. Now the midground, because it's below that plane, is not in focus. But nobody cares about the midground because they look at the beautiful background. Oh, the mountains are great. Oh, the flowers look great. Oh, that little bit of trees in the midground. Nobody really pays attention to that. So there's no free lunch with the tilt shift lens, but it's just that the things that people pay attention to in the picture are in focus.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to try that. Macro is so fun. What do you find the most challenging thing with macro?
When I first got into macro, I took like close-up pictures of everything. It's like, oh, that's so cool. Look at the texture on that. And then it gets sort of repetitive after a while. And the hardest thing I find is just coming up with scenarios or environments or techniques, or taking the a mundane subject and putting it in a situation like when I took that Lego a stormtrooper and I said, oh, how am I going to light this up? I said, oh, a match, a little match in the hand is would be great. And so just and I said, oh, that I'm glad I came up with the idea, kind of thing. It's just and it's very rewarding because you solve a problem and still be creative without breaking the bank, if you will, by finding all this great lighting stuff. So just the challenge, and what challenge you find is how to be creative as far as the environment goes for your macro photography.
I'm so glad you said that. It makes me feel so much better about myself for not sucking because you kind of think you just throw a macro lens on and everything looks cool up close.
Yeah, it
And
does
then
for a while.
yeah, and after you get over like the whole like it's kind of like when you get your first DSLR camera and you move up from like a point and shoot or something with a smaller sensor and you're like, "Oh my God, the background's out of focus. That's so cool." And
Yeah, right,
then
right.
after a while it's just like, "Okay." And it's kind of the same thing with macro and it's like once you get over like everyone takes a picture of like the first thing they can find. It's like, wow, fabric. That's what fabric looks like. And then once you get over, it really is a challenge trying to find things that are cool. And you see those like those, like the mystery macro pictures where it's like, what is this
Yeah,
picture of? And you have to figure
yeah,
out,
yeah.
it's like this high magnification macro. But
Well,
yeah,
what I think, and what really works as far as macro, I think, is that if you can get a series of very, very close images of everyday fruits or objects or whatever, and make a panel out of it, and you
mm,
could actually hang that on the wall, and like each like three on the top, three on the bottom. I've seen stuff like that. Like, oh, what is that? That all six of them in a row has an appeal to it that I
yeah.
think not just a single one of them does.
Yeah, and textures, focusing on textures is a
Yeah,
big thing where it's
exactly.
like you can take something where you can kind of it's a little bit easier in the sense of you don't have to worry about composition as much. You can just take a full bleed image of just a cool texture and
Yeah.
the fact that it's something that zoomed in is just cool. So,
And I think people get hung up on the fact that macro has to be, oh, one-to-one macro or very, very close up. You could just get close without getting macro close and still create great macro-esque shots. Like I saw
yes.
one picture some guy had, he took a picture of just the water coming down from a shower, and just sort of zoomed up in that, and it was amazing.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm going to get to the next question, but before I
Oh,
do,
sure.
on that same vein, Um, a lot of people don't realize that a macro lens is a really good portrait lens. So if you
Yes.
want a lens that has, for the people that are really into detail and getting
Yeah.
like up close headshots or portraits, a macro lens is always great for that. Want to
And
jump to this
especially,
question? Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
especially if you find a macro lens against that has that round aperture blade, like
Mm,
that works really well also for portraits because now your background is also creamy, buttery smooth, and it's
great
not
tip.
polygonal. Yeah.
Great tip. Andy joining us on Vimeo is asking, do you ever use Flash for macro?
So I typically don't. I use light. I use a lot of light, but I don't necessarily use flash. In other words, I don't. I don't have the strobe going off every time I take a picture, if that's what he's asking. But I do use a lot of light because sometimes I've tried flash photography, and for some reason, like if I and I typically I'll do it for one. If I try to do it outside, uh, it is the light has actually spooked some subjects. You would think so, but it actually spooks them in the flower. Whether it's the flash going off or it's the sound of the light popping, and then it refreshing. That I have had that problem. And as far as I've used ring lights, that's as a nice strong source of light, where I have a constant light like the lume cube at certain areas. So if you mean flash in terms of strobes going off, I typically don't, because I can't also, as I change the plane of focus on bracket imaging, it's harder for me to combine the images because the lighting is off ever so slightly between images that it messes my shots up a little bit. So
Mm,
I don't use flash photography, but I do use a lot of light.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, light is necessary. I always struggle with the depth of field thing where it's like without focus bracketing, because I'm lazy. I mean, let's just put that right out there, right there. Without doing focus bracketing, it's like Do you go for the shallow depth of field and have this kind of fall off, or then you see some images where you can tell they're bracketed with like 60 images and it's
Yeah,
stacked, and you're like, oh my God, that's super impressive to have that depth of field like all the way through like a bug.
yeah, yeah. Well, even that shot I had of the little car and with the city also, that with the bug, it takes a lot of images, but not as much as with this, because now you're going from foreground to infinity as the steps, right? As opposed to a bug distance going from here to here,
Yeah.
even though you have 60 shots. So that becomes, so you have to take almost a series of bracketed images. But Photoshop has actually gotten really good. Before it wasn't so great. I had to use a program called Helicon Focus to combine them. But now I just bring them all in as layers. I select the layers and just say combine images and say it's stacked, and it is great job.
Yeah. It's
I'm
doing
probably
such a
using
great
AI or
job now.
something. I don't know.
Yeah. It's so because I used to have the same thing where if I used to try to manually focus stack,
Yeah,
and there was always something off, and you get like whatever that error message is where it's like one
yeah.
of the images cannot be, and I'm like, "Ah, really? The worst.
I hear you.
It's like when you try to do like, like a pan or like do like
Yeah,
the Brennizer effect or something. You
yeah,
have
right, right.
like where did I go wrong? I thought I took enough images. 47 images isn't enough. Ah, Mahesh, it looks like we covered it all. I think
Oh,
you
great.
opened us up and got us a little more creative. I might have to dust off my macro lens and see what I can do. Try
And,
to
and I'm telling you, try that little the hands thing, that really the more I play around, the more uses I find for it. To position things a certain way, certain background. You could print a background if you want to, and have it hold the background, so you can have that as a
that's what I need to do. I got some Lego stuff here. I'm gonna have
yeah,
to order something. Order my son some more
yeah,
and just play
some
around
hot
with it. He
Hot
makes it
Wheels
fun.
or something.
There we go. I got it all right there. Hasn't cleaned up his toys in forever. So it's all right there. I got a macro studio on my floor 24 hours a day.
Okay.
Let's go. We're ready. So, Mahesh, huge thank you to you. Of course, the Sony team for always supporting what we do here at the event space. And to all of you out there, of course, we always do it for you guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting your questions in. All we got for today. Another rendition of the B&H virtual event space. Now in the books. Catch y'all next time.